about the soft landing and in his confidence that the U.S. economy will avoid recession. And instead of talking about how confident he was that there would be no recession, he basically said that there's no way to know, that nobody can tell for sure whether or not the U.S. economy is going to have a recession. And if we do end up in recession, whether it will end up being shallow or deep. So it seems that he's waffling a bit on his soft landing and just basically saying, we have no idea what's going to happen. We're just hoping we get a soft landing, but nobody actually knows whether we're going to get a landing at all. Another reporter asked,
The Fed chairman really doesn't know what's the future of the U.S. economy. In his recent press conference, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell uncovered many shocking things, and all of them seem good for Americans in the short term. However, if we see it in the long term, all these Fed actions are going to bring the catastrophe we never saw in the financial world. The Fed's decisions show that the U.S. economy's future is quite obscure. Powell isn't doing what benefits the economy, and Americans have to pay a high price for this mistake. There are a lot of warnings in Powell's speech, but you can't understand that without Peter Schiff. He knows how to decode the hidden clues in what Jerome Powell recently said. And believe us, Peter Schiff has surprising things to uncover. Watch the video until the end to know how the Fed threw cold water on investors' expectations. Let's get started. Recently, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell held a press conference and told Americans about the economy's condition. The facts and figures that he gave suggest that the American economy is on its way toward growth, and there is no inflation at all, in the real sense. What was presented is what the Fed wants every American to create an illusion of. But the reality is different. Jerome Powell said that because wages are increasing, consumers have to pay high prices for the products. Besides this, there is no inflation at all. While this statement may have worked well for the people living outside America, but people in America can see that the wage increase is significantly lower than the inflation increase. The U.S. government may create an illusion that everything is wrong and no American should worry about the economy. But that's a lie. If every American keeps on thinking things are good during the time of the collapse. Peter Schiff scrutinized what Jerome Powell said during the press conference, and what he found interesting. Jerome Powell is himself clueless about the U.S. economy. He knows what should be done, but cannot make the right decision. Since Joe Biden is at his back, who can't afford to go with unpopular and election-losing decisions, the U.S. economy is being allowed to decline further. The rule is simple. The Fed has to increase interest rates continuously, but it cannot do it. If it does so, Joe Biden will lose people's support because they have to pay more interest rates for their loans and mortgages. Jerome Powell said that yes, interest rates have been increasing, but they aren't increasing as much as they should be. Well, Peter Schiff said he should be asked why he is telling Americans that he is not doing something he can do. He can raise interest rates, but he isn't raising them. Perhaps that's a mockery he and the U.S. government is doing to the Americans. Peter Schiff said that the interest rates should be increased, but why is the Fed taking so much time to increase them? Why is the Fed so sluggish to decide that interest rates should be higher than inflation rates? And inflation continues to be a pain when you don't raise interest rates. Already, the inflation rate and increase have broken records. Instead of an inflation increase of 2% that the Fed had expected, inflation increased by roughly 6.3%, which is a lot for consumers. Here's a little reminder to like the video if you are loving it. And if you don't want to miss videos about the evolving economics and the financial order, subscribe to our channel. Let's continue now. And let us ask the interesting question: how and why is inflation increasing? Well, the Fed is the entity increasing it. On one hand, it's saying it's fighting inflation, while on the other hand, it itself is increasing it. It's not easy to comprehend how someone can fight against their own pet. The reason for inflation is spendthrift government spending that is higher than the revenue generated. Therefore, the Fed has to print more money to cover the extra money the government spent. And this creates inflation. Even if inflation has stayed higher, the Fed chairman said that Americans have to wait to have a moment of peace. And people don't want to hear that. They have paid higher prices for months, and investors have lost their money. And still, they are being asked to show patience and tolerate what they have been tolerating for months. Jerome Powell didn't say that we have beaten inflation. Rather, he said that we are doing good. But we have to do the same for many more months to come. Listen to what Peter Schiff said about that.
Acknowledge that the current inflation rate remains well above the Fed's 2% target. It's basically triple that 2% target. He did acknowledge that October and November's numbers were welcome, but he reiterated the Fed needs to see more substantial evidence that the reduction in inflation is permanent, that it is on a sustainable downward path. And that is exactly what the markets did not want to hear. The markets wanted Powell to claim some sort of victory, to say, yes, this decline shows that our medicine is working. But instead, Powell said, I'm glad to see this, but it doesn't prove anything. We still have a lot more work to do. We still need to see a lot more evidence. And until we do, it's full speed ahead. Now, Powell also said that we need to have a restrictive monetary policy, and that while we have moved into restricted territory, he admitted that the current policy is still not restrictive enough, which begs the question, if current policy is not restrictive enough, then why not raise rates more? If you know that the current policy is too loose, then tighten it up right now. Why drag your feet? Why wait till another meeting to make the adjustment that you believe is necessary to make right now? Powell also said that despite the recent high inflation, that long-term inflation expectations remain well anchored. And to an extent, they are certainly in the bond market if you look at the long end of the curve. But I think that's going to change when investors finally come to terms with the reality that high inflation is here to stay, and that despite its resolve, there is no way that Fed is going to bring inflation back down to 2%. But Powell acknowledged that the longer inflation remains high, the more likely it is that those expectations will become entrenched, and that is exactly what is going to happen. Can we talk about notification?
But how much should interest rates be increased, and for how long? Peter Schiff said that now, we cannot say that interest rates should be increased by, let's say, 5% to bring inflation back to normal. Nor can we say that increasing interest rates will normalize everything, and that we can bring the rates down. Rather, we have to keep increasing interest rates violently until they beat the inflation rate. And then, we have to slow down the pace and keep them increasing as inflation increases. After the 2008 financial crisis, increases in interest rates were slowed aggressively while inflation continued to increase, creating a gap. That's why today, we are left with no option but to increase interest rates more than the inflation rate, because we are already behind. Once interest rates beat the inflation rate, the rate of increase will be less, but the increases have to occur steadily. Therefore, there isn't a decided percentage increase in interest rates and the time period for which it should be done. Listen to what Peter Schiff said about that.
Reporter asked him about the size of future hikes. Would he be going 50 basis points or 25 basis points? And Powell's answer was that he didn't think that the pace of the increases was really that important at this juncture. What he feels is more important is how high rates ultimately have to rise, not how quickly we get there, but also how long rates have to stay high before they can come down. Because I think the expectation is that after we have these high interest rates, in order to bring down inflation, that somehow the Fed can return interest rates to the low levels to which everybody has become accustomed. But those low levels were, in fact, emergency policies that were put in place first as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, and then as a result of COVID. But interest rates had no business ever being that low, and there is no reason that anybody should be expecting rates to return to those levels again. So to say that, hey, all we have to do is raise rates up to 5%, and then inflation is going to go away, and then we can bring them back down to 1 or 2%, you can't do that without sending inflation right back up, reversing all the progress that has been made. But of course, they're not actually going to make any of that progress because the rate hikes that have taken place to date are insufficient to return inflation to 2%, nor do I believe that any future rate hikes will be large enough to do the job, because they're not going to be able to complete the mission because of the problems in the economy that are going to be created along the way, and because there is no chance they're going to get any cooperation from the U.S. government because they are not going to cut spending. Nobody has the guts to cut any government spending. Nobody wants to raise taxes on the middle class. Some people want to raise taxes on the rich, but even if they can get those tax hikes through a Republican Congress, it's not going to make a difference because there won't be enough revenue there to make any kind of meaningful reduction in the budget deficits that are at the heart of the inflation problem. Another reporter asked Powell,
And what the Fed chairman said about the recession. Jerome Powell said that the decline in inflation had been recorded. However, he has to wait and see the data to ensure that the decline is permanent and not shallow. That's a diplomatic statement where one gets rid of the question and plants doubt about the future. The reason is that Jerome Powell is himself doubtful of the U.S. economy's future. When he was asked about whether he thinks there will be a recession in the U.S., instead of saying that there won't be any recession, he said no one can tell that. What does that mean? Well, this means that you have to prepare for a recession. This throws cold water on investors' hope about the future market because the Fed chairman himself is clueless about the recession and the U.S. economy. Listen to what Peter Schiff said.
confident he was in the Fed's ability to get inflation under control. And again, Powell said that while the recent data is welcome, that he needs to see more substantial evidence that the reduction in inflation is on a sustainable downward path, basically repeating the identical words that he spoke earlier in his prepared remarks. He was also asked about the soft landing and in his confidence that the U.S. economy will avoid recession. And instead of talking about how confident he was that there would be no recession, he basically said that there's no way to know, that nobody can tell for sure whether or not the U.S. economy is going to have a recession. And if we do end up in recession, whether it will end up being shallow or deep. So it seems that he's waffling a bit on his soft landing and just basically saying, we have no idea what's going to happen. We're just hoping we get a soft landing, but nobody actually knows whether we're going to get a landing at all. Another reporter asked,
What do you think? Isn't this situation unprecedented when the Fed doesn't know what to do? It's a dilemma where making the right choice is unbearably painful. What do you think? Will the Fed bring inflation down and better things for the investors? Or will the Fed try to avoid the inevitable collapse? Comment your opinions in the comment section right below. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel for more videos on the latest economics and financial news. Until the next video, stay tuned.